speaker is a former governor of the Central Bank of Pakistan. She was then at the World Bank, where she worked on groundbreaking initiatives during the Arab Spring. She's also been a president of the Asian Development Bank prior to her current position as Under Secretary of the United Nations and Executive Secretary of UNESCAP. Please welcome Dr. Shamshad Akhtar.
Honorable Prime Minister, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, it's really a pleasure to be here in Sri Lanka, given that it's my first ever visit to Sri Lanka, even though it was a part of my region when I was at the Asian Development Bank. Mr. Prime Minister, your visionary statement on the future shifts in your development strategy with export orientation at the heart of it, with the supportive policies and establishment of the necessary infrastructure, in particular harnessing the ports, is very timely, and we are here to support you. In a minute, I will share with you how we can, going forward, work with you. First of all, I think the protracted global financial crisis has taken a toll all over Asia now finally, even though the region has shown tremendous amount of resilience. But when one looks at economic statistics, there is no doubt a need to rejuvenate our economies and reposition them. So it's very heartening to note that you are at the forefront of it. As we look at Asia at large, we are on our platform, which is an intergovernmental platform, deliberating on how countries can position themselves in light of the changing economic and trade realities. In particular, what's important is something you have mentioned, is to examine the implications for the small and medium enterprises and people, but to see how they can be a solution to the problem. SMEs have long been the backbone of the Asian economies, and they have contributed almost 30% of the total export earnings. They account, on average, about 95% of all enterprises and employ over 60% of region's labor force. So harnessing them more in this age of sustainable development agenda that United Nations is pursuing very aggressively would help give competitiveness edge to the SMEs and impart that competitiveness edge to the exports, and hence lead to drive economic growth and job creation. With changing realities SMEs are facing, of course, both the best and the worst of times. Continued trade liberalization at the global and regional levels and advances in ICT technology have entwined to create rich opportunities, which have been discussed, as well as pose formidable challenges to both countries and firms alike. So having dynamism being pursued, which is so typical of Asia being pursued, would be the way going forward. On the one hand, an unprecedented number of new opportunities have opened up for firms of all sizes to sell their goods and services globally. E-commerce platform that has been discussed has helped bridge gaps between demand and supply by enabling producers and merchants to connect more efficiently with customers around the world. Yet, in spite of unique opportunities e-commerce platforms can provide to SMEs, they remain underexploited in the region with fewer than 10% of firms selling their goods online. Access to reliable, affordable, and resilient broadband connectivity has been one of the major barriers to e-commerce trade in our region. So what are we doing? We are pursuing on our intergovernmental platform pretty aggressively now the Asia Information Superhighway development, whose master plan and regional cooperation framework was just approved a couple of days back at the UNESCAP platform by all the member states. Let me also mention that competition has become fierce in global and regional markets. Weak global demand coupled with rebalancing in China has resulted in trade growth slowing to 3.5% over the last 5 years, which is well below the averages of 11 to 12% that were witnessed in pre-crisis period, and well under the economic growth level in our region of Asia Pacific. So also it has to be recognized that if TPP and RCEP are enforced, they will also have important implications for international business and investment in Asia and the Pacific. The progression of ever large and complex regional trade agreements with overlapping rules of origin and differentiated standards would make operating in international markets more complicated than ever. In light of the increased competition from new entrants operating under duty-free market access provided under the TPP and Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership RCEP, which is now being discussed even within the ASEAN, is something that we need to position ourselves the rest of the non-ASEAN economies. Investment liberalization will increase transnational cooperation activities affecting both SME development and inclusive growth in host countries. Harnessing positive spillovers of increased transnational activities require ensuring transnational corporations form sustainable linkages with SMEs and that transnational corporations contribute to sustainable development in host countries. I'd like to highlight 4 important factors for the development of the transnational cooperation and SME linkages. 1, the presence of local SMEs with potential to meet transnational cooperation's high standards. The absorptive capacities of SMEs, which is quite critical to harness. The corporate strategies of the transnational corporations and our vigilance on that. And finally, a holistic policy environment to attract mutually beneficial FDI, incentivize the transnational cooperation and SME linkages, and facilitate access to technology. Several of these processes are underway and are being deliberated in our intergovernmental platform by the member states of Asia and the Pacific. Also, I'd like to highlight that the Global SDG Compass initiative is also being deliberated on our platform, which provides companies with an innovative guide to align their strategies with relevant SDGs. UNESCAP that I represent has developed the responsible business model to facilitate companies' engagement with SDGs, but particular focus being SMEs. So to conclude, distinguished delegates, I'd like to point out that UNESCAP in some senses is offering a holistic solution to the response of the slowdown in the region as well as in promotion of trade in the region. Revitalization of trade is going to occur as UNESCAP further takes forward some of its landmark agreements and takes it to the logical conclusion of further implementation, the first being the Asian Highway Road Agreement, the Asian Railway Road Agreement, And what we are attempting to do is working with a number of member states to talk about more seamless connectivity, regional connectivity, which will harness more not only regional trade, but harness Euro-Asian interlinkages with it. We are very fortunate to have had the benefit of the timely launching of the China's Belt and Road Initiative, and we are also a signatory of that with China, and we will be using our regional connectivity work and making sure that it is positioned to support member states take fuller advantage of the Belt and the Road Initiative of China. Vice Minister of China just mentioned about APTA. I wanted to say how protracted this process has been, but what is good is the final agreements that have emerged, which will hopefully lead to already member states have ratified the agreement that was struck at the recent APTA meeting, but there will be a final APTA ministerial meeting in January, hopefully, which will lay the forward path for the finalization of these agreements. So thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, for the World Export Forum that you are hosting out here in collaboration with our sister organization, ITC, and I'd like to really acknowledge the role of the Export Development Business Council for inviting me and making my visit comfortable along with other delegates. Thank you, Mr. Prime Minister.